Now, to be a book series that is predominantly written for children, I think there are a lot of lessons that adults can glean from it as well. And quite honestly, this whole series surprised me as to how good it was. When I was, coming up in middle school, high school, the school library never had all of the books, just certain ones. So I never really got into them until this year. Speaking of, ever since I finished it at the start of this year, I've read like 11 books. It's crazy. And 7 of them was this series. Now, I'm going to be reviewing them in chronological order, not necessarily the order they were written in. I read them in the order that the author, C.S. Lewis, preferred them to be read in. A little side note, if you buy it on the Kindle, the full set, which is what I did, that's what I read it on, you actually also get a segment of stories called Boxin', I believe, which are a collection of short stories that C.S. Lewis wrote as a kid, I believe. It's very similar to Narnia, where you have animals that have their own country and they talk and have their own politics or whatever. And that's at the very end of the collection. But to be perfectly honest, I didn't quite get into those as well as I did the Narnia books. And there's a variety of reasons for that. So I just kind of like plowed through them as fast as I could. Didn't really connect with it. But we're here to review the Chronicles of Narnia. Not that. So, contrary to popular belief, and up until this year, my exposure to this series has been mainly an old show adaptation they did of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then the 3 most recent movies they did, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, and Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Now, in the actual book series, those movies have books in between them, so they're not chronologically next to each other. You don't have The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then Prince Caspian, and then Dawn Treader, and all that. There's books in between. And I'll get into that more so here in a minute. First one up is, and I got a little board here where I read all the names so I could remember all of them. See if that looks... There we go. So yeah, I got Boxing down in the bottom there. First one's going to be The Magician's Nephew. He went back and wrote this book after writing a lot of the Narnia books. And this one just establishes how the traveling between our world and Narnia began. And it establishes the series as a multiversal story, and you realize there's more universes than just our world and Narnia. There's seemingly an infinite amount of them, and there's a place in between that you can travel to that is kind of like a nexus point, if you will, that can travel to all of the other universes via these ankle-deep pools. You just have to have the right equipment, per se. But you follow a couple of characters, Polly and a boy whose name I cannot remember at the moment. It was like George or something like that, who grows up to be a character that's a little more prominent later on. But it's in this story that you learn the origin of Narnia, the origin of the White Witch, the origin of the wardrobe itself. And this is definitely a top tier book in the series for it to be the one that you read first. And it's just so intricately written and made. And that's another thing about this whole series is the expert way C.S. Lewis ties all 7 of these books together. Like, it is just like phenomenal how he does it, and that makes it an even more fun read in my personal opinion. So moving on from The Magician's Nephew, you have The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is the one that everybody knows about, where you have Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. They come into the picture. They travel through the wardrobe into Narnia, find it frozen, in winter, but never Christmas, and you meet a lot of the talking animals. Mr. Tumnus, the White Witch, is at the height of her power, seemingly. Aslan, which is this mythological-like lion who basically created Narnia. He's in all honesty, he is an allegory of Jesus, as people call it. He is a representation thereof. You have a lot of parallels between this story, all of these books really, in the Bible, and a lot of the ways, when you have a lot of scenes with Aslan in it speaking, it reminds me, because I've read the Bible many years ago, cover to cover, and it reminds me of a lot of the ways that God would speak when you have parts of the Bible where he's actually speaking. The way he words things is like unique to everything else in the whole narrative of the books in the Bible. Like it's definitely, you can tell a difference there. And Aslan kind of talks in that way. He always has some wisdom to give our characters, and our characters learn life lessons in every single book, unique to their current situation. It's a big battle between good and evil, all the good stuff, and there's even a very similar to the crucifixion event that takes place in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It really is just fascinating how he ties everything together and brings everything to a head at the end. And then moving on from that, you have the third book, which is The Horse and His Boy. I could kind of take or leave this book. It takes place during the rule of Peter, Susan, Lucy, and Edmund as the four kings and queens of Narnia. Now, you have a couple of characters who I cannot remember the names of, but you have two humans and two talking horses kind of going on this journey together from a country called Calormen, where slavery is a big thing. They're trying to journey to Narnia basically for freedom. All the while you have a bunch of different things happening in the background. Calormen is going to try and invade one of the neighboring countries of Narnia before getting to Narnia. I think Archenland was the name of it. And you learn that there's a lot more to the backstory of the main character, the boy, than what meets the eye. It's fascinating enough, but like I said, I can take or leave that book. It's not as interesting as the rest of them, but still a good read in my opinion. Then you have the fourth book, Prince Caspian, which is the second movie they made in the most recent films. And this one was, kind of mid-range, I'd say, in between The Horse and His Boy and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So this takes place centuries after the second and third book because Peter, Susan, Lucy, and Edmund have already returned back to their world, and you learn through reading these books that time moves differently in Narnia than it does in our world. Like a few seconds in our world could be decades on Narnia. That sort of thing. They've been away from Narnia in our world for about a year now, and then they come back and learn that centuries have passed. The castle that they used to rule in is now in ruins. This new king, Miraz, has a nephew named Caspian, who becomes a very prominent character later on. But basically, he's in control of Narnia, he's subjugated all the talking beasts, and it's just a bad time for everybody. Big battle, as always, big conclusion at the end. You learn the origin of, I believe it's in this book, you learn the origin of the Calormens, from Calormen. Turns out they were also from our world as well. They just happened to, stumble upon a portal between this world and Narnia and just happened to end up in Narnia. Kind of similar to the Wardrobe, but this one was pre-existing, not constructed. So enough about that one. I'm trying to keep this as non-spoiler as possible so you guys can enjoy the books as much as I did. Then hopping into book 5, you have The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which was the third and last movie adaptation they did. I'm guessing it didn't do well enough for them to continue on the series, though I hear that had they been allowed to continue on, they would have went along to do the Silver Chair, which is a good story as well. But Voyage of the Dawn Treader is probably my second favorite book in this whole series because it's all about journeying east, leaving the east coast of Narnia, heading out into the open ocean to the islands beyond and the land beyond that. The journey is to Prince Caspian. He's older now. He's king of Narnia after Miraz. And he's voyaging to find out where these 7 or 8 lords that he sent out on like these missions or whatever to see what became of them because they never returned. It becomes a very multifaceted story. They visit a whole bunch of fascinating different locations, meet a lot of fascinating different creatures and people. Along this journey, they discover the unique fates that each and every individual lord met along his path. But the ultimate goal of this journey is to get to Aslan's country, which, in all honesty, is a representation of heaven. What I can really say for these books is what's really cool is how he describes Aslan's country and the open ocean and land leading up to Aslan's country. Like, the wordage he uses, it's indescribable. Like, I can't do it justice explaining here. You'd have to read it yourself. But the descriptions of their surroundings as they get closer and closer and ultimately make it to Aslan's country is just unlike anything I've ever read before. And I really enjoyed the last bit of this book especially. Like little details like the ocean water went from salty and became sweet, which was one of the signs in a prophecy they were given. Like that's how you know you're close. And the sun was getting bigger and brighter, but the water not only allowed them to see through the ultimate brightness of the sun, but also sustained them to where they wouldn't need food or drink. And ultimately, when you get this description, this visage of what Aslan's country looks like, even from far away, is just, like I said, unlike anything I've read before. But one interesting thing to note about the Voyage of the Dawn Treader is that Peter and Susan have grown too old and they weren't allowed to come back to Narnia for this particular adventure. Instead, you have Edmund and Lucy and their cousin Eustace tagging along for this adventure, which I found a interesting decision. But I feel like I personally enjoy the stories that involve all four of the siblings together. I think those offer the most, like, I don't know, unique situations. But that's just my personal opinion. But they're sent back home to our world again at the end of this story, and that's when you hop into the sixth book, The Silver Chair. Now, Edmund and Lucy are too old to return to Narnia. So instead, you have Eustace and a friend of his named Jill, who get transported into Aslan's country. But what's interesting about this story is that it starts out in Aslan's country. And Aslan charges them with this mission that they have to undertake, where he gives them the mission, gives them signs to look out for along their journey, and then he literally levitates them across the entire ocean and lands them safely in Narnia to go and conduct this mission. And the mission is the current prince, or king-to-be, which is the son of Prince Caspian, who's now elderly, has been kidnapped, pretty much. You had his mom, who you meet in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, who is the daughter of a star, and there's a whole lot of details with that as well. It's crazy, in my opinion. But basically, the mom was bitten by this green serpent and died. Prince, out of his grief to hunt down the serpent, went off on his mission after this serpent, I believe it was, and never came back. Turns out the green serpent was an enchantress, not unlike the White Witch herself, but her color signaturely is green, and which I think is probably a metaphor for how poisonous she is. It was a really interesting journey, and you encounter a lot of things in this story that lead up to the final book, which have significance, but you don't know it until you get to, honestly, the end of the final book. But still, it was quite interesting to go through and see how they resolved the conflict in the sixth book, The Silver Chair. The Enchantress herself was quite fascinating as well, like the way she confuses and warps the reality of her subjects. It was really interesting, but you also explore a different part of this universe, which is the underground, the underworld, if you will. And you learn that there's a whole civilization that lives in the caverns below, even further than what our group of people travel to. A place with its own light source, and what I found interesting, they consume gemstones as food, like diamonds, rubies, because they're so freshly made in the bowels of that planet and whatnot, like you can literally eat them. I would have loved to have seen that area explored more, seeing what C.S. Lewis could have come up with, but with everything else that was going on in the story, the characters couldn't make that happen. There was too much else to be done, so they had to, unfortunately, go past that part of the world unexplored. But hopping into the final book, which is called The Last Battle, and more, well, very accurately named, I probably, so I'm going to put it to you like this. That book is probably my number one favorite in the series. A close second being The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and a close third being The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, followed by The Magician's Nephew, and the rest of them are neither here nor there. But what's interesting about The Last Battle is how dark it is. You follow the current king of Narnia of that time. This time you have Eustace and Jill returning again to help out in his dire need. But Narnia is not in a good place at this point in time. When I say the whole book, up until the very end at least, is very dark, like you just have this overwhelming, depressing sense of end times and bleakness, and like, how are we going to get out of this without Aslan's help, because he's nowhere to be found yet again. And then you have this other evil deity coming into the picture, which is the deity of the Calormenes, because they're back again causing trouble and subjugating and tricking the talking beast into going astray. The way the talking beasts are led astray is honestly, in my opinion, got to be a reference to the book of Revelations in the Bible, and how the evil one, the Antichrist, corrupts and misleads people and leads them astray and off of the proper path. What makes this book my favorite is how it ends, because the book does end in Aslan's country, and it is probably the best way, one of the best ways I've ever seen a book series get wrapped up, and it's a very happy ending. But you again have this overwhelming, after all the dark stuff happens in Narnia, and just how Narnia concludes is just insane to read the description of. But going past that, you have more descriptions of what Aslan's country is. And I'll only spoil like a little bit of it. And those who know, further up and further in, that's a big reference to what happens at the end of the story. What they learn is that Aslan's country is like the way it works is the further you go in, the bigger it gets. And it's really like interesting how it's described. And I'm honestly not doing it any justice, but you learn that all the universes out there are merely feeble copies of the ones that exist in heaven, in Aslan's country. And you have Aslan's country in the center of it all, with like bridges or whatnot extending out to the heavenly versions of our world and the other worlds in Narnia, and it's all interconnected in this heavenly place. But it's here that you have the return of literally every single character that you have encountered in all 7 of the books, and they're all coming back together in this glorious reunion. And it was really cool hearing that, or reading that, and how it's described. And I honestly thoroughly enjoyed the last part of that book. You also see the return of a lot of familiar places from the earlier books, like the Magician's Nephew and the journey that they go on. But it's really like, honestly, this review cannot do this series justice. I think everybody should read this series. And they're short books too. I think each book is like 16 chapters long at best. And they're very thin, and they're very quick to get through for what all and how much is in them. But yeah, I really, really, really enjoyed it. I'll leave you with this as far as the ending of the last battle. The way it is concluded, and with everybody being so happy and everything, even with everything that happened before entering Aslan's country, all of that ending and all that good stuff, there's a sense of not so much the end of the story, but this is the beginning of something new, something greater to come. And that's where you leave the characters, as them moving on their way to experience this new world. But I won't say any more because I don't want to spoil anything. But that pretty well does it for this book review. Like I said, ever since I finished the book It, which took me 4 months to get through, I think it was, I've been rocketing through books ever since. I think that makes a total of 11 books this year, since January 1st, 2024. And it's currently July 8th. Obviously, I'm not reading as fast as a lot of other people, but still, that's pretty good for me with all of the other things that I'm balancing. But I'm currently about to finish the Percy Jackson series. I'm in the last book of that, so that will be the next book review. So until then, I will see you guys for the next video, whatever it may be. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.